Hello, bonjour, hello, hi, heya, and privyet, hockey fans. Welcome back to the Europuck podcast, the show where two Brits talk all things European hockey as part of the Hockey Podcast Network. My name is Hayden, or Odd Man Rush, as you can see right up there, and joining me once again after our two week or so long hiatus is, of course, my fellow co-host Chris Gadsby. Hey, Chris.
Hello. I'm impressed that you got the intro correct after the time away.
Not gonna lie, so am I. I thought, you know what, this might not go very well, but I'm gonna give it a try regardless. And I didn't even look at my notes because I have it written down like on my iPad next to me. Didn't even need to look at it. So I thought, you know what, I'm doing all right here. But yeah, Chris, it's been about 2 weeks since we properly sat down and talked hockey. How you doing, bud?
It has. We've had Christmas and New Year, and we're now in lockdown 3.0 or whatever. Yeah. I mean, tier 4 kind of felt like lockdown 3 for me. This feels like lockdown 4. But...
Pretty much. Yeah, it's kind of like every single week they're putting it up another number in the list and being like, in about 3 weeks' time, we're going to be in like tier 14 and you're not allowed to, breathe unless you have a substantial meal with it. Or you're not allowed...
Yeah, I've been seeing like things going around, like pictures of Boris Johnson with boxing gloves on, saying this is Boris Johnson in tier 8 when you try and put the bins out. But I mean, it changes so quickly. Like it was on Monday he did press interviews saying we're going to keep schools open. Then on Tuesday said national lockdown, shut all the schools. So
yeah.
Great, thanks. And then parents and teachers around the country had like 4 hours to suddenly prepare for homeschooling.
Yep. So basically, the UK, we've got like 3 different strains of the virus here now, I think. Something like that. All the other countries
I don't know
around
if
the
South
world.
Africa one's taken hold, but we've definitely got 2.
Yes, and all the countries in the world don't want to see us anymore. We've also had Brexit go through, so that's great. So now Europe doesn't really want anything to do with us either. No. So 2021 is off to a great start for our homeland. But regardless, rather than sit here and get down about how terrible the political situation is in this country, whether you fall on one side or the other, I really don't care. Let's talk about something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more topical. Chris and I sat there a couple of days ago and thought we could carry on with, the usual format, looking at the scores and standings from around Europe and everything like that. However, we figured we'd pick that back up next week because, a lot of leagues around Europe, very similar to us, took a break over the Christmas and New Year period, or they decided to use that as a good opportunity to kind of flush the virus out of their respective leagues and their respective systems for a couple of weeks and go, we'll start back in the new year. So instead, we are going to talk about the World Junior Championships 2021 in Edmonton. It was supposed to be in Red Deer as well, but it was in Edmonton completely, pretty much, I think. So obviously, there are a lot of European teams that were there at the tournament. So we figured, let's talk about the World Junior Championships instead. So Chris, obviously we're going to talk a lot in detail about the specifics and the teams that did well and specific players and specific games that kind of caught our eye. Obviously, it was difficult for us to watch a lot of the games because it was a 8-hour time difference between us and Edmonton. So it wasn't ideal. I managed to catch a few games. I managed to catch a handful of games in the group stages. Because for context, most of them started at 11 p.m. or 2:30 in the morning here. So I can imagine it was ridiculous for European, like Central European and kind of Russian fans from all over the continent. But based on kind of the response that you've seen, based on the highlights that you might seen, what was your kind of overall response to the way that the tournament was set up? Do you think it was a success? Do you think things went well given the whole global situation surrounding it? And what did you think about the results that we saw? And spoiler alert, USA won the gold medal. What do you think about all of
that? Yeah, I think it was a good tournament on the whole. Yeah, I didn't see kind of any of the games live. My viewing was all watching the highlights really, because I've got my what seems to be 8 to 4 jobs. I can't really stay up at 2 in the morning to watch, Slovakia, Switzerland. But it got off to a bit of a rocky start, I thought. Like when we were just before we finished up before our Christmas break, and they were going through their, they'd ended up in the bubbles, and I think it was it Sweden and Germany had got put on the same commercial flight, and then there were positive tests in their camps.
Yeah.
So their pre-tournament games got disrupted, and everyone had to kind of shift about. And Germany were meant to play America, and then they couldn't because they were all in quarantines. Then America played somebody else, and and bits and pieces like that. And I thought, oh, is this going to go kind of how we want it to, or is the virus going to start taking over? But that seemed to get out of the system early on because they were hot on with the isolations and the testing, which is something that so they learned from the NHL playoffs, and they had the funding to do, which we don't obviously have in a lot of the domestic leagues, which is why we're seeing all these postponements and things flaring up. But I think on the whole, it was a good tournament. There were some surprising results in there, ones I didn't see coming, ones where there was like 10 minutes to go in the third or something, and I looked at my phone and checked flash scores and went, that's the result. That's kind of what I was expecting. So we'll see them in the next round. And then I check, half an hour later, and it's just gone completely the other way. And I was like, oh, okay. That's kind of messed my thinking up as the way this was going to go. But I mean, we're going to get into details in things later on about talking points and all the rest of it. But I think on the whole, we had a good tournament. We expected Canada and USA to go deep, and they did. We expected Russia to go deep, and they did. And we expected, Austria and Switzerland to be at the bottom, and they were. So it kind of went a lot in the way of how kind of I expected it to go, particularly. I mean, you see it all the time when you have tournaments like this, is you have the teams that are going to be at the top and the teams that are going to be at the bottom. And it kind of went that way for the most part. I think it became much more interesting in the playoffs, as you would expect, again, because then you're getting the top teams and you're not getting, 11-0, 16-2, whatever that final score was. I think it was 16-2.
Yes.
Coming through. And, congratulations, as you said, to the USA, who, having seen the goals in the final, in my opinion, they did get a little bit lucky, but it doesn't matter how they go in, they all count.
Definitely. I think, touching on what you said at the beginning of that, I think there was a lot of concern, and rightly so, I think, with a lot of the kind of stuff we were hearing from some of the respective teams. Like you mentioned, Sweden couldn't send a certain number of their players because they'd tested positive. Canada had some issues where they had to send a group of players home because they'd tested positive for COVID and all of that stuff. And then obviously Germany had their fair share of issues with it once the tournament had begun. There's a lot of discussion whether certain teams took the kind of containment and keeping the players safe as seriously as they could have. We're not particularly going to go into that here. I think the important thing to mention is, and the thing that should be commended, is the fact that all of the teams and all of the people in charge of running the event did a great job once all of the teams were actually there in Edmonton in their respective bubble or in their bubbles or whatever it was. As we saw from the IIHF, I'm pretty sure they reported every single time after the first few days where there were no positive tests. The players seemed to take it very seriously once they were in the bubble. They knew that if they didn't take it seriously, there'd be the possibility of them either not going as deep into the tournament as they possibly could, or even being sent home from the team because they might have broken team rules or tournament rules, etc., etc. I think overall, regardless of the results and who won and who got the medals and everything, the tournament itself was a resounding success. Like, let's be perfectly honest here. All the teams that got to the tournament stayed relatively healthy, or they may have been had some issues with it early on, but as the tournament went on, things got a lot better and everything kind of settled down and they could go through the motions. I feel like the week or so before, and we even talked about this on some of our episodes before the tournament began, we were kind of like, oh, is this a good idea to keep going ahead? There is a lot of issues here. However, once all the teams were in the bubbles and we were seeing consistently negative results, there were a lot of I feel like everybody kind of breathed a sigh of relief and went, okay, we can actually focus on the hockey as opposed to the medical situations behind it, the social situations behind it, even some people, maybe the political situations behind it. It's kind of like, let's focus on the actual tournament at hand and see what's going on. And I'm glad that you mentioned the kind of big blowout losses, because let's be perfectly honest, this tournament was a very unique tournament in a lot of ways. Obviously, no fans in attendance, lots of testing, bubble, all of this situation, but also the fact that a lot of these teams, and it's not an excuse, but a lot of these teams weren't necessarily at full strength because they couldn't take certain players with them, or there are certain players that had issues with suspensions. I mean, suspensions, that's kind of, you're at the tournament, that's kind of on you more than anything. But I just want to bring up here, I'm going to bring up the schedule from pretty much the entirety of the World Junior Championships here. And there's a few games that I want to highlight. First of all, the one that Chris mentioned, the 16-2 loss for Germany against Team Canada. Next to that, you can't quite see it on the screen because of how I've got things set up, but the USA later that day beat Austria 11-0. Then you had Canada beat Switzerland 10-0. So there's 3 different group games in this tournament where there were double digits goals scored by one team. And I mean, you also had your fair share of 7-1, you had 7-0, you had 7-1 again, 6-0, 7-0. So there was a lot of games that were well and truly blowout games, let's be perfectly honest. So, Chris, obviously there was a lot of talk about this, especially when Germany were defeated 16-2. Do you think that there's any kind of incentive to reduce the number of teams participating in the World Junior Championships? Because there were 8 teams, as far as I'm aware, competing in the World Junior Championships this year. I can just bring up the
10.
standings. There were 10, sorry, excuse me. There were 10, but then 8 went through to the playoffs, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I got mistaken. So there's 10 different teams that made it. And to be perfectly honest, like Chris mentioned, Switzerland, Austria, and Germany for the first half of the tournament really struggled to kind of get their foothold in this competition. Do you think that there's some merit behind reducing the number of teams? Do you think that the IIHF should maybe consider not having as many placeholder teams? Do you think this is more of a unique situation because there's a lot of other factors going into it? I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Chris. Go for it.
The problem I have if you reduce it is, if you reduce it down to let's say 8, I mean, you've got to realistically reduce it to an even number, unless you do similar to the Olympics, which I believe is what the Olympics do, which is you have one big group with a round robin, and then you have the playoffs off that.
Yeah, something like that.
So you take it down to like 7, and then you play 6 games in the group, and then the top 4 go semi-finals, final, or whatever. I mean, if you look at this year, you've got Switzerland and you've got Austria, who lost all of their games, conceding 20 goals and 29 goals. I mean, Austria, they only scored 1 goal.
Yeah.
The problem I think I find if you take it down to 8 teams or something, I think you're just always going to have this, to be honest, because I think the gap between the top teams and the bottom, you're always going to have Canada, America, Russia, Sweden. Those 4 teams are always going to have such stacked rosters in the juniors because they're such, great hockey nations. Finland in there as well.
Yeah, definitely add Finland in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got, 5 out of those 10 teams. You've got 5 teams which are such dominant hockey nations. Like, they are, significantly above the rest of the nations there in terms of draft picks, in terms of caliber of players and all the rest of it. So if you take it down to, say, 8 teams, then you've only got, whoever's in the group with the 3 dominant teams has probably never got a chance.
Yeah.
And in the other group, you've got 2 teams that are still good teams, but not at that level, where it seems to just come down to a game between those.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult one because, it's like when you have the football and the qualifying tournaments for the football, because they do it in such a way that, obviously it's on a much lesser scale here, but they do it in such a way that the top teams have an easier route to the final. So they don't get drawn in groups with each other.
Yeah.
Which means you end up, and I think I can't remember exactly but you've got England, who are like in the top 10 in the world. And we've got San Marino, who are a team made up of builders and plasterers, if I remember rightly.
Something like that.
And normally it's like 9-0.
Yep.
You've got the likes of Montenegro, and I think the other half decent team might be something like Bulgaria.
Mm.
And you kind of look at all those and you go, yeah, okay, England, they're going to win most of those matches and they're going to make it. And it's the same thing here, Canada. You look at it and you go, Canada against Slovakia? Yeah, they're going to win that. Canada against Germany? Yeah, they're going to win that. And so I don't know, until hockey becomes a much wider sport and there are so many more people and the caliber gets ridiculously high, a bit like football, I think you're always going to have these games where even at the top tier, your elite nations, the five that I've mentioned before, are always going to be so much better than the rest. I mean, you look at Canada; they scored 33 goals in 4 games. That's an average of 8 a game.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those situations where I don't think they should limit the number of teams, similar to you. Now, I would point out that, for example, the Team Great Britain squad in the World Championships that takes place, during the spring, we're usually the team that's kind of considered is arguably the team that shouldn't be in the competition. Like last year we won 1 game against France, that kept us in the tournament. And a lot of people, especially from North America and maybe even in the Scandinavian countries, would argue, what is a team like Great Britain doing here? They get completely destroyed by all the big nations. Kind of basically we're the Austria. Not to like the extent that Austria got beaten in this tournament, but I feel like Germany is, especially in this tournament, the German team is such a fascinating example of why I don't think you should limit the number of teams, because Germany, over the last few years, especially with guys like Leon Draisaitl, you've got Moritz Seider coming through, you've got Tim Stutzler, obviously, who was on this team at the World Junior Championships. You've got some very solid German players coming through. They're kind of trickling through the NHL system, the international stage. They're not necessarily a big hockey powerhouse, but within the next sort of 5-10 years, if things keep going the way they're going, at the World Championships, the German team could be a pretty formidable force with some very strong hockey players on that team and could maybe even win a gold medal or two for themselves if they manage to kind of round out the rest of their roster with some solid players. But at this tournament, the context, so they lost 16-2 against Germany, right? It was a terrible game for the Germans. It was shockingly bad for them, and it was a great game for the Canadians. And it came to a point where I think everybody other than some Canadian fans were kind of like, can we stop this? This isn't fun to watch anymore. It's sad because this team is getting absolutely bludgeoned and there's nothing they can do about it. But at the same time, they were dealing with a load of COVID cases on their team. They had the option, supposedly, according to the commentators on the TSN live stream, they had the option to postpone one of their games and get some of their players back and healthy again, but Germany decided not to because they had Finland and Canada to play in the first 2 games. Then I think they Then they had Slovakia and Switzerland as their final 2 games. They decided, you know what, if we want to make it to the playoffs, let's just take our lumps against these first 2 teams, come back healthy. They also got an extra day's worth of rest by not postponing their games. I think that game would have been put on the day they had an extra day of rest or something like that, and then they could come back against Slovakia and Switzerland, hopefully win those 2 games and go through to the playoffs, which is ultimately what happened. I mean, Tim Stutzler got named the best forward at the tournament, as far as I'm aware. 10 points in the tournament for him on a team that Germany, for the first time in their nation's history, earned a playoff berth at the World Junior Championships. So they went from having such a terrible start to the tournament, basically being embarrassed on an international stage, 16-2. One of, if not, I think it was arguably one of the biggest wins by Canada, but it wasn't. I think it was 2nd or 3rd on the list, something like that. And Germany had such a terrible start, but they managed to make it through to the playoffs. Yeah, they didn't get very far, but they managed to do better than a lot of other teams or several other teams in the tournament and managed to kind of rise from the ashes and get 2 wins in the tournament. I feel like that's a great example of going, this is the exact reason why you need to have some of those, for want of a better term, lesser nations or weaker nations in the tournament. Yeah, Austria got completely destroyed. I don't think anybody who knows or has a decent understanding of international hockey and kind of how the structure works, I think most people were expecting Austria to get bludgeoned by the bigger teams, which they did. I mean, I actually wanted to give a huge shout out to the netminder of the Austrian team. I want to pronounce his name properly, but it's been a while since I heard it now. Sebastian Warenscheitz, something like that. He supposedly played 3 games in the tournament. I'm not sure if there was any him being pulled midway through the game, so then it counted towards the other goalie being the game played, something like that. It's a little bit confusing how the game's played. But throughout the tournament, he had 194 shots against. 194 shots. He was an absolute workhorse in that net, and yeah, he allowed a ton of goals, but what an incredible performance for a guy from a nation that, well, let's be perfectly honest, they didn't stand a chance of winning this tournament. And it's kind of those little stories, like, you never know, a performance like that might get him drafted to an NHL team and give him a chance to potentially make the NHL one day, all because he did the best he could in a bad situation. What are your thoughts on all of that, Chris? I've been rambling for a little while, but, it's just kind of like, when you see how Germany finished the tournament, and you see a guy like the Austrian netminder having to face so many shots and barely getting any help in front of him, it just goes to show you that there can be these other little storylines that go through the tournament, and it keeps it interesting, as opposed to, oh, the top 5 teams are still really great and they won all of their games and it's fun. What do you think?
Yeah, it does a bit. I'll jump back to Germany first, and it is an important point to mention that, you mentioned it right at the start of the podcast, in that it took them ages to get going in this tournament. But then, we know they had all the virus problems, and then their first 2 games were Finland, Canada. They lost them both, but then they came out. They got the overtime victory against Slovakia after having been neck and neck for most of the way through the game. 1-1 after the first period, 3-3 after the second period, and then they took 5-4 victory against Switzerland as well, which they did very nearly completely mess up.
Yeah,
it's worth saying that as well. If you have a look at the game stats, Germany were 4-0 up in that one at the end of the second period. They very nearly completely threw it away. They conceded 2 goals within a minute of each other at the midpoint of the period to bring it back to 4-2. Then they got an empty net goal with 2.5 minutes to go, but then took Justin Volek took a game misconduct penalty, a 5+10 for cross-checking, and then so it left Switzerland on the power play for the rest of that game, and they got 2 goals on that power play to bring it back to 5-4. So I bet it must have been some clenched muscles on the German bench towards the end of that. And again, like with Austria, as you said, you just have a look at the stats, and you look at Sebastian Rarenschitz, and you look at it, and he's got a goals against average of 7.45.
Ouch.
But the save percentage is only just a touch below 900.
Yeah.
So that's what you've got to weigh up. As you said, yes, okay, his goals against average is appalling, but if you compare it to the amount of shots he was facing, he's still in and around. There's some NHL netminders that have a save percentage lower than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, they face fewer shots, but it's not like he's had a save percentage down at 600 and he's just a cheese grater full of holes.
Yeah.
I think Austria really struggled. Of course, Marco Rossi played all 4 games, but didn't contribute on the scoreboard. Difficult to contribute on the scoreboard when they only got 1 goal in 4 games.
Yeah.
So Senna Peters, congratulations for scoring their goal. And the other thing you said with Tim Stutzel being the forward of the tournament, let me have a look. Of the 14 goals that Germany scored, he got 10 points off it. So he was involved in 10 out of the 14 goals that Germany scored in the group stages. And they only got obviously the 1 goal in the. But out of 10 out of the 15, because I don't know if he had anything to do with the goal.
You would expect so, but then again, obviously, he might not have necessarily.
Game. I'll have a look.
But like Tim Stutzler,
This is Stutzler. No, he didn't. So 10 out. Yeah,
okay.
So he was 2/3 of Germany's goals he was involved in.
Yeah. And it just goes to show how reliant they were on Stutzler. And I think it's also worth mentioning, like you mentioned about the Austrian netminder, how, he had he faced a ton of shots. His save percentage was close to 900, which is incredibly respectable. But, he was playing against many players that will or could potentially be future NHL players that end up spending 5, 10, 15 years in the league. So the fact that he was able to perform so well, not just against, it's relative, let's be honest, it's relative. The fact that, he allowed 16 goals or whatever, or however many goals. But look, it's one of those situations where these players are so honoured to be at that tournament and get the opportunity to represent their country. And I saw an interview, I think it was with a 16-year-old player on the Austrian team. I think his dad was the coach. I can't remember all of it off the top of my head. I saw it on Instagram or something, I think. And one of the reporters was asking him about like the homework that he was having while he was at the tournament, and he basically said, "Oh, it was I had a little bit more at the beginning of the tournament, but now we're at this point, like I haven't got as much homework," kind of thing. Like, funny answer, like good kid, showing he's got a good sense of humor. But the thing is, him and all the other players, whether it be for Switzerland, whether it be for Austria, those guys. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for those players. Some of those players, especially from those weaker countries, might never play hockey after this tournament. They might decide a couple of years down the line, you know what, I can't make it pro. I have to be realistic here. I've got to go down a different career path, or I need to do something else completely different, or they don't get drafted into the NHL and they don't find a gig in Europe or something. And, they have to decide, I can't do this anymore. And the fact that they'll always have a jersey with their national logo on it, with their name on the back, that they wore at the highest level of major junior competition, that's such an incredible thing for them. There's so many players in those countries that would kill for an opportunity like that. And I don't think it's fair for kind of the North American media to take away or delegitimize the fact that they're there, all because their team blew them out. Like, why don't you be happy that your team won? Like, yeah, it's not necessarily entertaining to watch when the opponent you're playing against is losing by 10, 15 goals, but at the same time, those kids are honoured to be there. They're 18, 19-year-old kids, some of them as young as 16. Like, these guys, think of how much experience some of those younger players have got and how great of an experience that is to go head-to-head against some of the best players in that age group in the entire world and get the chance to learn what it takes to become a better player. Yeah, they might not have had the best situation with the training, and obviously they couldn't really interact too much away from the rink because, all of the safety measures and everything. But you never know. A lot of those players might go back to their native country or their native league and tear up the league for the rest of the season, all because they gained some confidence from the tournament, or they learnt like a little something new about them, or a coach told them something, or a player on the opposing team told them something. Like, I feel like it's such a vital tournament, especially for these fringe nations like the Austrias. Switzerland isn't so much of a fringe nation nowadays, but Germany, for example, I'd say they're more of a fringe nation, especially because they've got a lot of young guys coming up the system, whereas Switzerland has a lot of already established NHL players. So it's kind of, give the kids a chance, right, Chris?
Yeah, I find the junior championships interesting, and I'll kind of tell you why. Is that not so much in the top tier. Obviously, everything else got cancelled this year, but let's take Division 1 Group A. Let's say, for example, it was going ahead,
okay,
and you were a 19-year-old, your last year of being eligible,
mm-hmm.
and let's pick a random country, Denmark.
Okay.
And you have a brilliant tournament, and you win the tournament, and Denmark go up into the top tier. You then don't get to experience the top tier because you're then too old to be eligible.
Yeah, that's true.
So you then go back into the full men's where Denmark are not even featured.
Yeah.
In even down to Division 4, Denmark aren't even there. Sorry, they're in the top tier. What am I on about? But you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can have a country who are at the top tier of or the second tier of the
juniors, championships,
and then you never get there. Whereas take a side, let's for example say Great Britain. I'm nowhere near a hockey player or anything like that, but I'm 24. If I was part of the Great Britain squad that went from Division 1 Group A into the top tier, I've got 10 years still of my career where I'd be eligible for GB and have the opportunity, if I keep playing well, to be in that top tier.
Yeah.
Whereas in the junior system, you could obviously have your birthday, become too old, and then you might not make it into the men's side for a good few years, by which point they may have been relegated 3 divisions down. And then you had this great achievement when you were young, but then never got to experience the top tier. I just find it a bit interesting, really, that that they really work for it. And I think that's potentially why controversy is the wrong word, but obviously we had, you did your video a while ago about throwing the silver medal away. And I think that's because particularly when you want something so badly and you know that it's your last opportunity, like if you're in the men's squad, you've got next year, you've got the year after, particularly if you're young. Whereas here, this is your last opportunity at this level to achieve the top. And if, some people might not, get the, obviously not this year because there isn't the promotion, but you just don't get to, experience it as much.
Yeah, and with Elias Andersson of Team Sweden, who threw his silver medal, he threw a silver medal into the crowd, into the fans, threw it to a fan in 2018, I believe. That's exactly the reason or the motivation behind him doing that is the fact that he'd won a silver or a bronze at every other World Junior Championship level. He wanted the gold and it was his last chance to do so. Now, does that make what he did right? No. But at the same time, you can kind of understand that a kid, they're all 16 to 19-year-olds. They're young. They're not fully developed, whether it be physically, emotionally, mentally, everything like that, like whatever argument you want to make. They've still got plenty of growing to do. Like, think about yourself when you were 18, 19. You probably had a long way to go. Exactly, and it's kind of... go for it.
I was going to say it was something that I know we're going to come on to, but because you've not fully developed and, yes, you're 19, 20, but you're not fully matured in kind of the mental state, which is why you have things like the silver medal thing, why you have Barrelgate, which we'll come on to, because they're not, I think particularly in the heat of the moment, they're not fully aware yet. You've got a group of 25, 19 and 20-year-olds who have just done this incredible thing. And of course, they're going to go a bit nuts. I mean, anybody who's been to university and knows what freshers can be like, knows what happens when you get a group of 19 and 20-year-olds. I remember having one person who I think spent their entire first term student loan in Freshers Week and had to live off cans of beans for 11 weeks up to Christmas.
I feel that's a very regular thing to happen, especially at UK universities. It's a very much a UK thing, like freshers. But I mean, we've obviously talked about some of the more specific things. I feel like we may as well go through the standings and kind of how the tournament went for... just to kind of give ourselves a chance to go, we weren't expecting this team to do so well. We weren't expecting this team to kind of have such success or any sort of surprises or thoughts that come our way, really. So I'm just going to take you through the standings of the group stage to begin with. So there was two groups, obviously, two groups of 5 teams. We had in Group A, Canada won every single one of their games, 33 goals to 4 goals against. Finland took second place with, they had 3 wins and 1 loss in their tournament, 16 goals to 8. So they weren't a very high-scoring team, but they didn't allow that many goals. Then you had Germany taking up third place. They had 1 win and 1 overtime win with a pair of losses to start the tournament. Their goals for and against was terrible at 14 to 28. Then you had Slovakia, who I will admit, Slovakia gave the Canadians a pretty good run for their money in their group stage game. I sat and watched the game. I was up till about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning watching that. And up until about the third period, the Slovakians had done a very good job of shutting the Canadians down and kind of showing that they weren't immortal, and kind of everybody expected, even though Kirby Dack went down, everyone was expecting the Canadians to be this unstoppable force that would kind of steamroll through the entire competition. And yeah, they did beat the Slovakians 3-1 at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure. But Slovakia gave them a decent game out of it, I would argue. And then in last place... I mean, go for it, Chris.
I was going to say, it was 3-1, but I always kind of... I kind of delve deeper into these scores, particularly at this sort of thing, and it's something I'm definitely going to come on to later, is that I take them with a pinch of salt because you look at it, and the third goal, 13 seconds from the end from Jack Quinn, was an empty netter, and I almost kind of don't count those, if you know what I mean. So it was kind of 2-1, and as you said, they really gave Canada a run for their money.
Absolutely. And I mean, they did a better job than Switzerland did, who allowed 10 goals against Canada. And they, like Chris mentioned earlier, lost all of their games, only scored 5 goals in the tournament. Interestingly, Slovakia only scored 5 goals in the tournament as well. However, the goal difference was slightly better in Slovakia's favour, and they did actually manage to win a game. And then in Group B, we had the USA topping their group with 3 wins and a loss. We had the Russians taking second place in the group with 3 wins, but one of them being in overtime as well as a loss. Sweden took third place in the group with a pretty similar situation, except instead of the overtime win, they had an overtime loss. They were basically 2-1 and 1. The Czech Republic, who were okay this tournament, they weren't great, but they gave a better run for their money than the lower teams in Group A, for example, because they won 2 and lost 2. whereas Slovakia only won 1, Switzerland won none. And then obviously you had Austria at the bottom, 1 goal in the tournament, and 4 straight losses. So that then led to the playoffs. And I'll just take you through the playoffs once it loads through. So we had Canada beat the Czech Republic in the quarterfinals, Germany beat Russia, the US versus Slovakia, and Finland versus Sweden. It would help if I could get the names right. So Canada shut out the Czech Republic. Russia beat the Germans. A close game, 2-1. I feel like some people might have thought that game would be a little bit of a wider margin for the Russians. They weren't necessarily the best team, they weren't a particularly very good team all tournament long, I'd argue, the Russians. They did enough to kind of go through to the semi-finals, but they didn't have the best of tournaments. I expected them to do far better. I had them winning the silver medal, so... and then the United States beat Slovakia 5-2, and then Finland beat Sweden 3-2, which was a nail-biter of a game as far as I'm aware. And that led to the semi-finals where Canada played Russia, completely destroyed them 5-0. Askarov had a really tough night in that net. And the USA played Finland, where the USA won 4-3, I believe, a last-minute goal, or within the final 2 minutes of the game. It was 3-3 because Finland had tied the game up, and then the US came back and managed to get the game-breaking goal.
Yeah, 1 minute and 16 from the end.
Oh, that's what I really like about this tournament. There's always those like clutch last-minute heroic goals, whether it be in a group stage game or the semi-finals or the gold medal match. There's always one of them. And then that led to the bronze medal game, which was between Finland and Russia. It was a 4-1 win to Finland, which congratulations to them winning the bronze medal. I didn't have them winning a medal at this tournament. I thought they would certainly be in the running for one, but I didn't think I thought they'd be kind of the 4th, 5th place team. They managed to prove me wrong, so congratulations to them. So that means Russia finished 4th place. Certainly underachieved on the expectations I had for them, and I think a lot of other people did as well. And then, of course, the aforementioned gold medal game, a 2-0 victory to the United States over Canada. Goals from Alex Turcotte and Trevor Zegras, and a 34-save shutout for the first round Florida Panthers draft pick Spencer Knight in the game. So a pretty dominant goaltending performance for them. And yeah, the United States take the gold medal. So I'll bring up the overall standings just so you can see that as we kind of discuss things as they go along. I want to talk about Canada quickly before we kind of move on to anything else, Chris, because...
Yeah, I'm doing Canada first.
Like I mentioned, and like we've talked about pretty much all tournament or all episode long, the Canadians were a team that we expected to pretty much steamroll through the rest of the competition. They did a good job during the group stages. A lot of people don't really pay too much attention to the tournament, especially the kind of casual fans, or the more casual than hardcore, kind of sitting in the middle of that meter. Because, you know, the group stage, you do play against teams like Switzerland and Austria that don't really stand much of a chance, and you're expected to win those games. However, I feel like the Canadians, and this was mentioned by one of the US players, I believe, before the gold medal game, and it kind of got a few Canadians fans up in arms a little bit, and that's even before the Barrelgate scandal, which we'll talk about in a minute. But they basically said that whether it be 5-on-5 or in general, the Canadians hadn't really been challenged as much as they could have been by other teams in the tournament, or they'd been so much better or been seen as so much better and more intimidating than some of the other teams in the tournament, that when they finally came up, for want of a better term, against a legitimate opponent in the US, of course Finland is a legitimate opponent, Russia's a legitimate opponent, let's not delegitimize them at all. When they actually came up against the teams that had a legitimate shot of winning the tournament or looked hot in the tournament, like the US did, they kind of crumbled a little bit. And I think the biggest place, or the buck stops with the goaltending in that regard, because Chris and I were talking about this before we started recording the podcast. Devon Levi, the 7th round pick by the Florida Panthers, so interestingly, in the gold medal match, it was 2 Florida Panthers draft picks going against each other. Panthers wouldn't complain with that, especially with how Bobrovsky played last year. But looking at the stats, Devon Levi dominated the statistical categories. He had an under 1 goals against average, 3 shutouts in 6 games in the tournament. He was named the netminder of the tournament by the end of it. So it's kind of like, yeah, by all intents and purposes, he looked like the real deal. My argument would be is, he played against, Switzerland, he played against Germany. Both of those games were absolute destructions, and he didn't really face much of a challenge. I feel like the Canadian team kind of cruised through the tournament a little bit too much, to the point where once they actually got to the games that mattered most, they weren't necessarily sharp as they could have been already to deal with the kind of hard-nosed play that the United States were giving them. What are your thoughts on that argument, potentially, Chris? Like, what are your kind of overall thoughts on the fact that Canada coming into the tournament was so bigged up to be this dynasty of a team and wanting to repeat their gold medal from last year, yet they don't even score a goal in the final game of the tournament?
Yeah, I think obviously a lot of, in fact, all of the hype that was surrounding Canada was not them themselves, it was the media putting it on to them.
Oh, yeah.
But yes, I can see where you're getting at. You look at the games, you look at the first game against Germany, 4-1 at the end of the first period, it's 11-1 by the end of the second period, and then you just have a leisurely skate around for the third period, don't you? Slovakia, they did give them a good run for the money. So that was a good game. But again, I think overall the calibre just didn't get there. Switzerland again. I'm just having a look at the Switzerland game now. Now, the first period, Canada outshot Switzerland 14-3 in the first period, which again is where we were coming at with the, the netminders not really having to do a lot and all the rest of it. You look at the second period and Canada outshot Switzerland 23-4. Which is, just shows how dominant. And again, then Canada at that point, when you're 5-0 up, I would say they took their foot off the gas, but they scored 5 in the third period. But and then you get to Finland, which again would have been a difficult, could have potentially been a difficult game for them. But when you put the first on the board at 3:49, and then by the midpoint of the second period, you're already 3-0 up, and you're about there again already. I mean, take the first period in that Finland game. Right? They only scored 1 goal, but they outshot Finland 17-1.
Yeah,
they held Finland to 1 shot in the first period. So it's only in the final period I've noticed here. Like Finland had 12 to Canada's 5 in the final period. It's only when the games were kind of done and buried that the other teams. I think Canada took their foot off the gas, and it allowed the other teams to come back into it. You then go into the quarterfinals where they face the Czech Republic. And the Czech Republic are an okay side. But I think that whereas Canada, as we've mentioned, are like all first-round draft picks, your teams like your Germany, your Switzerland, no, not your Switzerland, your Austrias, your Czech Republics, that they're relying on a few stars who have been drafted. And the problem with ice hockey is, with all the line changes, your stars aren't always on the ice making an impact.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem that a lot of these lesser teams face. So you come up against the Czech Republic, and they obviously beat them by 3-0. You have a look at the stats there again when it starts to load. And it was a close one, actually. The Czech Republic actually outshot them. But Canada, I think, just had that extra touch. Then you come up against Russia, and when you get into the semi-finals, obviously, you're down to the last 4 teams. You expect it to be the elite teams, which for the most part it was. In fact, it was. But Russia, as we said, they have not had the greatest of tournaments. And I know we're going to get onto Russia in a moment, but the one game that really stands out to me is Russia got shut out by the Czech Republic. So you come into that and you go, well, Russia got shut out by the Czech Republic, and then we've just gone and shut out the Czech Republic in the quarterfinals. So we know we should have a decent side. And I can see what the Americans are getting at, because the first time they came up against that elite side, because Russia, this tournament, I'm sorry, but quite frankly, weren't.
Yeah.
The first time they come up against the elite side, they struggle and they don't score.
Yeah, it's so interesting to look at it. And I just want to make it clear that I'm not like putting the sole blame of Canada's silver medal on Devon Levi or anything. If anything, I think it was made more difficult by the fact that he wasn't facing a ton of action for a lot of the tournament, because it meant that he might not necessarily have been as dialed in as a lot of the other netminders. Like, think about, like, when you hear what so many netminders, whether they're on like the NHL network or they're talking like in interviews with the media and stuff, most netminders like it when they face a shot every few minutes or so, or they face a bit of action in their own zone, because it keeps them dialed in. And they say that the weak goals that are allowed, or the goals where they kind of have a bit of a miscommunication with their team, or there's a bit of a mistake on their end, or they don't quite anticipate it the right way, is because they've been watching the puck on the other side of the ice for pretty much the entire period, and then the other team just gets a lucky little shot and catch them off guard a little bit. So in Levi's defense, given the fact that, like, obviously he's not going to complain with the stats that he put up. Yeah, he would have loved to have won the gold medal for the team and had a shutout in the final game, but the stats that he put up were, I mean, they're pretty incredible, let's be perfectly honest here. But
yeah, I mean,
go for it.
I was going to say, I mean, as I said, I've watched the highlights of the gold medal game, and the first goal was a deflection out in front, which he could have done absolutely nothing about.
Yeah.
And the second one, where the shot came in, it hit the backboards, and he thought it had gone to the other side of the net, so went to hook at the other post. In the meantime, the puck hadn't gone to the other side of the net, and the American just picked it up and just flicked it into the corner before he could get back across. So the second one, perhaps he could have been a little bit more aware, but the first one was just completely unlucky. But I think the first, I mean, you can't even argue that the forwards didn't shot. They had 34 shots in that final game, and America only had 21.
Yeah. So
the defenders, particularly, they did their job. It just wasn't one of those games for Canada, I think.
And ultimately, it's kind of, that's the worst thing for them. I think of all of the different situations they could have been, the fact that it just kind of wasn't their game and the puck didn't bounce their way was pretty much the only thing that would have stopped them from winning the gold medal. And it just so happened that the final game of the tournament was the game where the puck didn't bounce their way. Because let's be honest, Canada were undefeated in the group stage. They were undefeated up until that point in the tournament. The US had already lost a game during the tournament, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, they lost one game during the group stage. So I'm not going to put too much of an emphasis on a loss during the group stage or anything. But the fact that the US are they'd faced a bit more adversity. They'd certainly faced more adversity than the Canadians during the tournament. And, it's a situation where they managed to dig deeper and the puck maybe bounced their way a little bit more than the Canadians, and their goaltender managed to stand on his head. Spencer Knight was a huge reason as to why the US won that game. 34 saves on the night. You can't really ask a goaltender to do much more than that. So, yeah, and kind of talking about the Russians, I said during our episode a couple of weeks ago that Yaroslav Askarov would be the reason, he could steal the gold medal for the Russians if he played his usual impressive level. And it turns out that he just simply didn't have it. And I think another player that a lot of, especially Vancouver Canucks fans, are quick to kind of dogpile on is Vasily Podkolzin. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. The forward, they drafted him in the top 10 a year or two ago. So he's been a player that's been highly touted. He's been with SK St. Petersburg with Yaroslav Askarov for a lot of for the last couple of years. He's really struggled all year long, whether it be in the KHL or in the World Junior Championships. He had a good game here or there where he notched a couple of points on the board, but I think overall, him and Askarov not performing the way that people were either hoping or expecting them to led to Russia finishing 4th place without a medal. Because, like I said, I will hold my hands up and say I expected them to be in the gold medal game. I didn't expect the United States to be as good as they were. And I am more than happy to accept the fact that I was wrong on that, because the United States played a solid game, especially in the gold medal match. And that's one of the really good things about, I do love the whole 7-game Stanley Cup playoff idea, and it's kind of you really are getting the best team because you have to win 4 games every series. But there is always something exciting about it comes down to one game. You have to basically put everything on the line in that one game and get the job done. And I feel like certain teams that really benefits, whereas other teams that are kind of in it for the long haul or are set up for more durability, it doesn't necessarily benefit so much. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the Russians during the tournament, Chris? Because like I mentioned, Askarov wasn't very strong, was he?
No, so I mean they had the good start with the 5-3 victory over America, and it's only conceding the three goals, 1 goal a period. You can't really complain at that. They then obviously had that blip, their regulation loss to the Czech Republic, a 2-0 defeat. Definitely not. But again, the net minding and that, conceding 2 goals. I mean, you can't really blame the net minding there. You just have to look at the forwards and say, well, you didn't put the puck in the net.
Yep.
You look at Austria, we'll kind of discount that because it's not really that relevant. And then the Sweden game, which they did, come out on top of in overtime. And again, they only conceded 3 goals. So in the group stage, 9 goals against in 4 games, you can't complain too much at that. Only just over it's a 2.25 goals a game, isn't it? Now, you can't really complain too much at that. And then they get past Germany, again, only conceding 1 goal. Canada is where the problem really lied there. 30 saves on 34 shots plus the empty netter. And I don't know if that just took the confidence out or what, but that wasn't a good showing from the Russians. Again, you've got to look at the forwards and say, where are your goals coming from? You can't, expect to win a game where, in fact, you can't physically win a game if you don't put the puck in the net.
Yeah.
And then into the bronze medal game. And again, I want to take the bronze medal game with a pinch of salt because that 4-1 includes 2 empty net goals for Finland in the last 2 minutes.
Okay. When
Russia pulled the netminder to try and obviously get that goal back. So with 2 minutes to go, it was 2-1, and then the netminder went. So you've got to have that. You've got to look a bit deeper into that scoreline rather than just taking it at face value. So other than that one Canada game, it wasn't a dreadful series kind of net minding wise. I just think Russia, they kind of struggled with the firepower out front. I mean, you look at they only scored on average a goal a game in the 3 games in the playoffs, and you're never going to go very far if you're only doing that.
Yeah, very true. And I think it's worth mentioning, so with the 2 empty net goals, Askarov only allowed 2 goals in that bronze medal game instead of the 4 that's presented on the box score. So that's kind of adding to your point, the fact that Askarov might not necessarily have had the worst tournament. Like he was good, but I think the fact that he was drafted so high, he's played so well in the KHL over the last year or so, I feel like there was another level to his game that he has hit in the past that he just didn't hit in this tournament for one reason or another. And yeah, it's not the sole reason why the Russians didn't finish the tournament with a medal. However, it's one of those little like storylines within the team, because ultimately there wasn't enough offense from the Russian side, and when there wasn't enough offense, the goaltending wasn't strong enough to be able to steal the show and stand on his head and, record a shutout when the team could only kind of get 1 goal in the net. It ended up being a close game, but usually in the opponent's favour, or a real like nail biter where the Russians just didn't seem to score enough in this tournament. I feel like that was their downfall here, wasn't it, Chris?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, like, as I said, they didn't score anywhere near enough in the playoffs. If you take the Austria game out of it, because it doesn't really count, you're talking 3 goals a game in the group stages. I mean, that's not bad considering they got shut out against the Czech Republic, but the fact that they got shut out against the Czech Republic isn't good either.
Yeah.
And I think of the Russian team, you do the deep kind of delve into the statistics and what happens, and it looks as though the net minding was the strongest part, because elsewhere, they came out of the blocks okay against the USA and had a strong kind of tightly fought game against Sweden. But other than that, I mean, they didn't light the tournament up kind of as we were expecting and as Russian teams in the past have done. And it just wasn't the greatest tournament for Russia in the slightest.
I'm glad that you mentioned that Russia-Sweden game, because as we've been talking, I reminded myself of something you alluded to me as the tournament was going on, as the group stage was going on, and that is, of course...
Yes, I was going to bring this up.
Yeah, and that is, of course, Team Sweden's group stage winning streak finally came to an end this year. Do you remember how many games it was consecutive that they won?
Yes, so they won the first one against the Czech Republic, and then they... I've lost their second game. Where's it gone? Oh, they beat Austria as well. And then that loss to Russia ended, I believe, it was either 55 or 56.
Okay.
I think it was 55. A 55-game group game winning streak has now come to an end with that loss to Russia. And Sweden, again, Sweden surprised me. I mean, I was hoping that I was pretty close with my predictions had Sweden managed to get past Finland.
Yeah,
I would have been quite close, but Finland just completely... It was their 2 goals in the third with, 8:56 to go, and then with 25 seconds to go. That was, having that game. That wasn't on at regulation time either. It wasn't in an empty net because it was 2-2 at that point. But when you've got 25 seconds to go and the team scores on you, that's about it. And then getting a 10-minute penalty for Noel Gunler at the end for unsportsmanlike conduct right at the end of the game as well. not great. But that surprised me. But yeah, so the winning streak has come to an end at 55 games, I think it was. And the longest winning streak now belongs to Team Canada, group game winning streak, but it's not quite as impressive because it's at 6.
6. There you go.
6.
See,
so if the format stays this way, you're talking 13 years undefeated Canada need to go. So maybe, on episode, what it would be about
2000.
It would be about episode 750 of the Europuck podcast. Canada in 2033, when I'm in my late 30s and still sat here doing this with you.
I will also be in my late 30s. Oh my God. Could you imagine if we were still sat here doing this podcast into our late 30s and we're like talking about how Canada have just beaten Sweden's record? That would be pretty incredible. But I feel like that record was mentioned a lot throughout the tournament, obviously, especially when Sweden were on the ice. And the fan response was very much like, oh yeah, but they barely ever won any gold medals or went far in the tournament because of it. Like, yeah, they were great in the group stage game, but they always find a way to kind of bottle it in the knockout stages. And say what you want about their success in the knockout stages and the playoffs and everything like that, but 55 straight games in the group stage winning, like, that's such an impressive achievement. And like Chris mentioned, the next one is 6, did you say, with Canada?
Yeah, Canada are on 6 now.
And that's basically all of their group stage games for this tournament. So
yeah, they won the last 2 last year,
yeah,
and then they won this year.
So 2 last year.
That's it.
Yeah, exactly. So 2 last year, 4 this year, and they've got to carry on for another 13 years if they want to try and beat that record.
The 2034 World Championships, they might beat it if they go undefeated between now and then.
Wow.
What I love in that is that you're relying on future hockey players who are currently 4 years old.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Going through and then becoming undefeated.
That's really weird when you think about it.
Do you reckon there's parents in Canada looking at their 4-year-old going, right, you're going to be the one that breaks this record? I'm going to put a ring in the garden.
Considering some hockey parents out there, yes, I absolutely imagine there are definitely some out there like that. It's the same with like those shows on like those trashy TV networks where it's like beauty pageants and stuff.
And it's all the parents.
Yeah, it's just the super competitive parents, whether it be hockey, sports, the beauty pageants or like art competitions, whatever it is. You've always got those parents.
Dance tournaments, isn't it?
Yeah.
The kids don't really care that much, and then it's just the parents.
Yeah, the kids are just there to have a good time and, maybe do well. And then the parents are like, you will come first place or you're walking home. But so congratulations to Sweden on such an impressive record. Obviously, the end of the tournament wasn't great for them, but I feel like we've done a good job on touching specifically on a lot of the different teams in the tournament. We haven't touched on every single one of them individually because a lot of the teams I didn't really get the chance to look at.
All night.
But to be fair, I do want to mention the kind of top players in the tournament because they've done top goaltender, top defenseman, top forward, and MVP, as well as a kind of all-star team. So we've mentioned several of these guys already, but there's a couple of guys from Finland, for example, that I do want to mention because we haven't really talked about them a huge amount, and they won a bronze medal, so they deserve a bit of credit. So Devon Levi got the top goaltender award at the World Junior Championships. As I mentioned, 6 wins, a 96.4 save percentage, so 0.964 save percentage, absolutely incredible. 0.75 goals against average, which is shocking, and then 3 shutouts in 6 games. And then you had Topi Niemela, I think it's Niemela. He had 8 points in the tournament as a defenseman and a +4, so that's a pretty strong showing for him. We also mentioned Tim Stutzler. He was a -4 in the tournament, but 10 points on 14 or 15 German goals in the tournament. And then the MVP went to the final goal scorer in the entire tournament, Trevor Zegras. 18 points, a +9, 7 goals, 11 assists. And that's a pretty good showing for an American player as well. Gets the job done. And then several of these players, as you would expect, are on the All-Star team also. The ones that weren't got the top awards but are on the All-Star team include Bowen Byram. He had a very good tournament, +13, 5 points in the tournament. Dylan Cousins, an alternate captain, also co-captain because Kirby Dack went down for Canada, +11 in the tournament, 16 points. Which is, pretty impressive. Tim Stutzler once again. And then Vil Heinola. He's a Winnipeg Jets draft pick, as far as I'm aware. He had 4 assists in the tournament, a +3 for Finland. He wasn't the top defenseman. It's interesting that they chose a different defenseman for the All-Star team instead of the top defenseman. But, I'm not part of the IIHF, so I don't know. So there's kind of one last thing I really want to talk about in this episode. It's going to be a slightly shorter episode than usual because, it's our first episode back after a couple of weeks. Give us a break, guys. And I want to talk about the Barrelgate scandal. Now, a lot of you might not know what I'm talking about here. Some of you might not. But we're going to talk about it in a little bit of detail and kind of talk about how ridiculous it is, personally. I'm going to explain it all to you. Get ready for a story, Chris. I hope you're ready. Wrapped up nice and warm. Got a hot cup of cocoa.
Kids, it's story time.
Gather round, European hockey fans. Let's talk about the Barrelgate scandals. Hope you've got a nice cup of cocoa. You've got a nice blanket on you. You're all wrapped up.
I love how everything has gate on the end of it.
Oh, absolutely.
These sort of things.
Definitely. I mean, I named it the Barrelgate scandal, to be fair. So, it's kind of like going on that trend. And
I don't know. I looked on it. It was like #Barrelgate.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Other people were saying it as well. Fair enough. So basically, the gold medal game ended, right? United States won. Everyone's like, "Way!" Well, everyone in the United States were like, "Way!" Everyone on Canada were like, "Oh, we got the silver medal. We should have won that game." Now, at the end of that, all of the Team USA players, coaches, off-ice staff, they all gathered together as the winning team does every year, gathers together for the kind of victory team photo. Like the picture with the Stanley Cup at the end of the playoffs every year. Team photo, everyone gets together. Because there is a trophy for the World Junior Championships, which I always forget that they have every single year, because kind of like I just expect them to get the gold medals, and it's kind of like, yay, gold medal. They also get like a cute little trophy as well. So they all gather together, but before they took the photo, the starting netminder, the player that had got 34 saves shut out for the team to help them win, Spencer Knight, goes to the bench and grabs this container with the Team Canada logo taped onto the side of it. He brings it into the frame, he goes and finds his position in the huddle, and then they take the photos. Now, as you can expect, a lot of emotionally upset and a very raw experience the Canadian fans had just losing to the Americans. A lot of them were like, why have you got a trash can with the Canadian logo sitting on the ice with you guys? That's a little bit disrespectful, right? Like, come on, you won the game. There's no need to pour salt into the wound. Now, I have actually written a lot of, I've gone through all of the reasoning as to why this happened and all of that stuff, but essentially, the whole argument was the head coach of Team USA, whose name is Nate Lehman. He basically told a story to the US team pretty much at the beginning of the tournament, or like the pre-tournament training that Team USA had together, about a former coach of Team Canada for the 2007 squad, Ron Ralston, and he basically told a story how travellers in modern-day Algeria, so French travellers during modern-day Algeria, when they would be walking through the Sahara Desert, which, bearing in mind, 500-mile desert, it's kind of like there's no water, there's no food, there's no access to any kind of essentials. So a lot of people die in the Sahara Desert. One of the ways they kind of marked their journey and kind of made it easier for people to travel through the desert is every sort of 5 kilometers, according to him, they would place empty oil drums kind of along the way to kind of signal the next part of the journey, or to kind of make sure they're going in the same direction, because in a desert it's very easy to kind of get yourself confused and walk around in circles, right? So they put these oil drums down, and essentially the whole philosophy behind it was you'd only be looking at the next barrel ahead of you, and that's all you've got to get to next. And then once you get to that barrel, you get to the next barrel, you get to the next barrel, and you end up getting to where you need to go, etc., etc. So the whole idea was Nate Lehman took this philosophy, presented it to the USA squad, and said, look, what they decided to do was, their whole philosophy was one barrel at a time. We're not going to talk about the gold medal. I don't want to talk about the gold medal. Let's just focus on each game as we go along. We have the game before us. Let's just focus on our next opponent. And one thing they did in their locker room every single game was have a container or a barrel. A lot of Canadian fans thought it was a trash can. It wasn't a trash can. It was a container where I would imagine they put lots of the equipment, like the equipment staff would have their gloves and their jerseys and stuff in. That's what it looked like anyway. And they taped the logo of the team that they were playing against that game. So, when they played Russia, they had the Russian, either the flag or the logo of their team on the container, on the barrel. And then if they won the game, the team would take a selfie with the barrel, and the kids, like the players, seem to really buy into this. Apparently, they really like that idea, and kind of like, oh, we're just taking it one step at a time. We can celebrate the victory by being like, look, we captured this barrel, kind of thing. So that's essentially why the barrel ended up making its way onto the ice. The players really wanted it with them when they when they won the gold medal, because they'd been focusing, and it was the philosophy for the entirety of the camp. So the head coach made it abundantly clear that, like, it wasn't meant disrespectfully. It wasn't a dig at the Canadians. It wasn't like trying to pour salt into the wound or anything. It was simply, this is a philosophy that they carried the whole way along. The players had really bought into the idea of taking a selfie with the barrel once the game had ended and once they'd won the game. Now, could they have left the barrel in the locker room? Yes. Was it the right thing to do? Who knows? Was it classy? Was it unsportsmanlike? Was it disrespectful? Well, it depends on who you ask. In my opinion, it was just a big argument about nothing. I can understand in the moment when some of the Canadian fans had just watched their team lose that they thought it was a sign of disrespect, or they were trying to insult their opponents. I can understand where that argument came from, especially when they didn't understand the context of the whole philosophy and the way that these barrels had been used by the team. But at the end of the day, it's a load of rubbish about nothing. I feel like a lot of fans just wanted something to blame or get angry about, and they basically tried to cancel a barrel on social media, which is something I've never seen before, but cancel culture is a fantastic, fascinating beast, and one day it's your barrels, the next day it's your toasters, folks. But yeah, so that's basically the story of Barrelgate. Chris, what are your thoughts on that? Thank you for listening to my story.
Yeah, I don't need to watch your video now, do I? I'm kind of similar to you, really, in the sense that I think obviously in the moment everyone was like, oh, not good. But, having been around hockey, I mean, I know those big blue barrels, the sticks are often shoved in there at the end of the game. They're, stuff's put in there. It's more a transport container rather than a trash can. And it was kind of symbolic and meant something to those American players in the same way that I'm trying to think of another example really, but people want certain things at their weddings, or I'm trying to think of another sporting example. The only thing I can come up with was back in the Olympics when they did those athletes did the Black Power salute because it was symbolic to them.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do it at that time. I think it is a lot kind of to do about nothing. I think the fact that the Canadian logo was on it was the problem.
Yes, absolutely.
I think they could have just rotated the barrel 180 degrees, but and then it would have been okay. But I think give it a couple of days when the emotions have gone, it's all blown over, and the explanation has now come out as to why they did it, and I quite like the reasoning and the story and the way of not trying to deal with the mountain at once, dealing with it in small sections, and I think it is kind of a bit of a nothing story really at the end of it. But then there's part of me that likes the kind of the photos with the trophy, particularly on the ice like that, to be kind of the pure photo. And I think I do agree with you in some senses that they could have a photo with all that stuff back in the locker room afterwards.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, is it something they had to do for the photo? No. Will they look back on that and kind of be like, oh, could we have avoided a bit of animosity at the end of the game? Yeah, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think the players on the Canadian team were particularly offended by it. I don't think the American players brought it onto the ice in an attempt to, as I've said several times already, pour further salt into the wound of an already disappointed Canadian side. I think I was just so surprised to wake up this morning and check Twitter and see people cancelling a barrel. I just thought that was fascinating. But yeah, it's just one of those things that it's I mean, in the heat, in the kind of emotion of the moment, they obviously wanted to kind of round off the experience if they'd done it with every single other team that they'd beaten so far in the tournament. It's kind of finishing the tradition because they'd managed to win the gold medal. So yeah, I mean, I can understand why.
Sense.
Yeah, I can understand why some Canadian fans would have been upset by it, or at the very least confused by the whole situation. Because in their defence, bringing one of those like equipment containers or barrels onto the ice to take a picture with it isn't a normal thing that happens in hockey games. Like,
I think that's the thing. I think because it was an American team thing and it was something that the coach had told them in the locker room, nobody outside that locker room understood at the time what the meaning was.
Yeah.
And I think now they do, it will all just blow by, to be honest.
And that's kind of what the head coach alluded to during the competition in the post-game press conference, because one of the reporters or one of the media members asked him about it to kind of explain it, to give everybody the context. He said, well, I'm sure that other teams in the tournament had different things that they rallied behind or had different slogans or messages, like they always do. You see it in like every team's locker room in the NHL. They have like a certain slogan every year, or they have like a certain slogan that they've had for their team for decades. It's kind of their mantra or something. So yeah, like I feel like at the end of the day, like you say, in a couple of days, everyone will have completely forgotten about this and they won't care about it. And, you know, it'll be like compared to, like we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, somebody throwing their silver medal into the crowd or yelling obscenities to USA fans in attendance because they're having a bit of a temper tantrum. Like, compared to that, this is incredibly tame and far less interesting and far less to read into, to be perfectly honest. So I feel like you just kind of leave it at that, really. It's a funny story though, and like you mentioned, I do find it interesting, kind of delving deeper into the context of why they were so interested in having the barrels around them, and kind of the story behind it, which is very fascinating. But at the same time, it's like, guys, it's a barrel. Should they have done it? Maybe, maybe not. Is it really that big of a deal? No, it's not. Let's be perfectly honest, guys. But other than that, Chris, I feel like this is a good place to end today's episode of the Europuck podcast.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to finish, and just finish up with congratulations Team USA, really.
Absolutely. I mean, congratulations to USA for the gold, Canada for the silver, Finland for the bronze. I mean, I'm going back to my predictions a couple of weeks ago. I had Canada winning gold, Russia winning silver, and Sweden winning bronze. So I managed to get one team right in terms of who got a medal, but not the right one. So my prediction wasn't necessarily very good, but it was a fun tournament. I wish it would have been a more Europe-friendly time to watch, because I definitely would have watched more games if they were started slightly earlier in the day. However, it is what it is. And in terms of kind of next week onwards, we're going to be going back to our usual programming, ladies and gents. We thought it'd be fun to kind of reintroduce the podcast back after a couple of weeks hiatus by, you know, looking at the tournament as a whole. Obviously, we have a big European connection. There's a lot of European teams taking part in the tournament. It was the North Americans that kind of stole the show, and I don't think anybody's particularly surprised about that. But it was worth mentioning nonetheless, and kind of talking about and kind of giving our thoughts on it. We're hoping to have a few guests as 2021, you know, kicks off and we're kind of getting underway. We're going to keep seeing how things go week by week. We'll either be doing the usual kind of looking at scores, stats, news and everything like that, or bringing on special guests, whether it be from the UK hockey world or elsewhere in Europe. And hopefully you guys will stick around for the next few months and enjoy the hockey content that we provide you until the season is over.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, we're getting into the business end now of some of the leagues, particularly in the KHL as well. So we're going to be starting to look at running, starting in the playoffs, and getting to the very exciting point of hockey. But I kind of find it quite incredible that we're like halfway through the season and we've done so many of these already. But, getting down to the business end, and hopefully we can have a good second half to the season. We'll have some good guests and see who takes the various trophies. Does anyone go on a St. Louis Blues run in the second half of the season?
I mean, speaking of the St. Louis Blues, and
maybe Dansk will.
Maybe, you never know. But like, the interesting thing is, just before we finish up, like you mentioned how we're halfway through the season. The NHL season hasn't even begun yet. Like, how crazy is that?
No,
like,
I know.
We've done like 3 months worth of 3.5 months worth of podcasts here, and the NHL, which we're not.
Everybody else on the network is
everybody else on the network has been kind of clutching at straws or talking about like fumbling their thumbs together and being like, I don't know. But like, we've just been here talking about lots of European hockey. So expect more of the same. Hopefully you enjoy that. Otherwise you wouldn't be listening to us. And yeah, I think that's a really good place to end today's episode of the Europuck podcast. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the show, whether you're watching us on YouTube, the video version, or whether it's the audio version on Spotify, Apple, various other places. If you want to keep updated on all things Europuck podcast, or send us your thoughts, opinions, or questions either from today's show or for our next show next week, you can follow us on Twitter at Europuck Podcast. It's right down there. Or on Instagram. We're not as active on Instagram, but we are still on there and do post things occasionally. So Europuck Podcast, basically the same as our Twitter handle. And if you enjoyed listening to either or both of your hosts today, if you enjoyed my little story time, if you enjoyed Chris's great stats that make me sound a lot better and kind of reinforce my points and make me look really good.
It is what I'm here for.
Absolutely. Then you can follow myself on Twitter at OddmanRushYT or Chris at Chris_Gadsby. But thanks again for listening, guys, and we'll see you again next week. Have a good one, folks.